Offence Archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Sunday Talk.
Talk Radio. Richard Tice. Powered by Debate.
Sunday morning with the Tice Man.
Richard Tice.
The heart of a common sense Sunday.
Richard Tice.
Talk Radio.
And a very good morning to one and all. It's just gone 10 o'clock. Yes, 10 o'clock. Did you remember to set your clocks and alarms correctly as the clocks went forward? It's Tice Talk. It is Sunday the 27th of March. And I look outside from the 17th floor of Talk Radio Towers and I can barely see across the river. It is grey, it is gloomy. I hope wherever you are, it's a little bit brighter. We've got an action-packed, full-on busy show. I'm going to be talking, of course, about the disastrous, the shocking, the woeful spring statement from our out-of-touch Chancellor. I'm going to be talking about Ukraine, of course, potential food shortages in parts of the world and the impact of that, and the impact of sanctions. And yes, we need to talk about lawbreakers. Yes, P&O ferries who admitted they broke the law this week. I'll be exploring that in more detail. And the immigration that is soaring, the illegal immigration of economic migrants across the channel. We'll be touching on that, as well as, of course, the energy crisis, renewables that this government is completely out of touch on. And look out for the big, wasteful non-job of the week, another shocking example of a waste of taxpayers' cash. That's coming up. Much, much more. We've got some amazing guests, and I want your input. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text us, 87222, using the word talk, or tweet at Talk Radio with your views. I'll look forward to getting your calls and reading those out, because I want to hear your views, your answers to the big questions of the day. What changes are you making to save money in this cost of living crisis? And what did you think of the Chancellor's spring statement? Stay with us. It's Tice Talk here on Talk Radio.
Richard Tice.
On Talk Radio.
Yes, indeed, that glorious intro to my Sunday sermon from my pulpit, where I can put forward my thoughts, my views. And I actually rewrote this sermon this morning. I wrote it firstly yesterday, and I was going to talk about winning against the odds, the extraordinary achievements of the brave soldiers and citizens of Ukraine. But actually, I woke up this morning furious, utterly furious about the Chancellor's spring statement. I've been sort of bubbling about it. I spoke last week about dependency being a bad word. And this week, I want to talk about out of touch, being out of touch. And in my view, Rishi Sunak and those around him in the Treasury are totally out of touch with the reality of what's going on. They're out of touch with history and what we learn and what that teaches us, because we have the greatest cost of living crisis in our memory, the greatest inflation crisis in our memory, and the greatest energy crisis in our living memory. And yet this statement did absolutely zero, nothing, to address any of these things. They're out of touch thinking that if you raise taxes, you'll grow the economy more. Complete failure to learn from when the Tories tried that between 2010 and 14. You had what was called Austerity Mark 1. We've now got Austerity Mark 2 on steroids. Completely out of touch, not realising that actually the government's balance sheets, their finances are robust and strong, and we need to be cutting taxes to help us through this crisis, not raising them and doubling down on the problem. Completely out of touch not to look at history. Between the two world wars, we had, for 30 years, our national debt was at least 50% higher than current levels, with higher interest rates to boot. So we can easily afford to cut taxes. And in addition to that, of course, we've got the treasure under our feet that I'll be talking about later that, you know, I'm rather keen on. Completely out of touch, because actually this Chancellor has raised more taxes in just 2 years than the lovely Gordon Brown did in a decade, in 10 years. There are 27 million more people paying more tax now than when the Tories were elected in 2019. And let's just look at some of the taxes that are going up. He's frozen the personal tax thresholds for the next 4 years. It's bad enough in a low inflationary environment, but we're into a high inflation environment. So that is absolutely brutal. That's going to drag well over 1.5 million of the lowest paid, the least well off in society, into paying income tax. Income tax was originally designed as a tax for the rich. Sunak now has deliberately made it the harshest tax for the poor. He's out of touch raising taxes on national insurance for jobs. The tax on employers is a tax on jobs. He's out of touch not cutting VAT, not taking advantage of that Brexit promise from the Prime Minister to cut VAT on energy because we're now free to do so. Yes, one of the bonuses, the potential bonuses of Brexit that this government has chosen not to use. Out of touch for not renewing the renewable levies, 25% on our bills. He could have cut that now. Out of touch for thinking that 5p a litre would make the blindest bit of difference on our fuel bills. And then the Chancellor, for a photo op, rocks up to a Sainsbury's petrol station, borrows someone's car, pretends he's filling it up, and then doesn't know how to use a credit card or a debit card to pay for it. I mean, honestly. And then thinking he can buy people off with a promise of a 1p cut in income tax in a couple of years' time. Chancellor, people are hurting and suffering now, not in 2 years' time. Get a grip, man. Get a grip. Totally out of touch. Not realising that if you want to grow an economy, you have to cut taxes. You put money in people's pockets. You put money into small businesses, and they invest it and they spend it more wisely than your civil servants. He has done absolutely nothing to address the energy crisis. I'll be talking about that later on. Indeed, all the talk in various papers this weekend is about doubling down on the very problem, the very thing that has created the increase in electricity prices. Yes, it's those subsidies to rich, wealthy landowners and foreign investors in the wind farms. Yes, they want more of them, not less. Continuing to forget that wind and electricity don't power 25 million gas boilers. Wakey, please, Mr. Chancellor. Unbelievable. Totally and utterly out of touch with reality, with the pain people are feeling, with the challenges ahead. And this is all, we haven't even got to April the 1st, when our electricity bills are going up by hundreds and hundreds of pounds, and our gas bills, because of the lifting of the cap. And already they're talking about, in October, the cap going up another 40 or 50%. Zero in this statement to address these issues. I'm fuming. I think it's unbelievable. I think these people are totally and utterly out of touch. There is so much they can be doing to address these issues, and they've deliberately chosen not. But I want your views, your thoughts, 0344 499 1000. I could go on, but I think from the pulpit, it's time to end my Sunday sermon. Well, there we are. I mean, that's the start. What are your views? What are you doing in order to save cash at this difficult time? I want your thoughts, your calls, your tweets, your text messages, 0344 499 1000. Coming up after the break, we're going to be talking to Julian Jessup, the Independent Economist Research Fellow at the Institute of Economic Affairs, to look in some of the details about some of the numbers, what the Chancellor could have done, should have done, and didn't do. Stay with us. You're listening here on Mother's Day to Tice Talk.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Radio. Investigate what's under the think bonnet.
Talk loud, talk proud. Highly toxic debate. Battery acid opinions.
A voice above the crowd.
Talk Radio.
The home of common sense.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. It is just about 18 minutes past 10. You've heard my Sunday sermon this morning on the Out of Touch Chancellor, the spring statement, and the tweets and the messages are already coming in. Adrian in Daventry, he says, Richard, these people have no idea how the people of this country are struggling. They pretend to, but they simply don't. At this time, while we're struggling, they should cut foreign aid, stop HS2, cut the green levy and halve duty on fuel. That's from Adrian. I think, Adrian, you're speaking for a lot of people. Well, let's speak now to one of the experts. Julian Jessup is a research fellow at the Institute of Economic Affairs and will, of course, have followed the spring statement very closely and looked in detail at the numbers behind it, because behind every spring statement, there's a very detailed document that's lodged at the House of Commons library with lots of the numbers and the information behind it. Julian, a very good morning to you. Thanks for being with me on Tice Talk. So this was a huge week for the Chancellor. In a sense, you know, having been very popular at the shortly after he was appointed and sort of wrapped his arm around the economy and everybody, 2 years later, it's a very different story. The headlines this weekend are very much sort of against him, and the front page of the Sunday Times talking about already potential further cuts to council tax to address the shortcomings in his statement. What was your view on this statement and whether it actually really addressed the sort of things that I was referring to in my Sunday sermon?
Well, I think I agree with almost everything that you said. I think there's no doubt that the Chancellor could and almost certainly should have done a lot more. For a start, actually, the public finances are in much better shape than anticipated. So borrowing is a lot lower than the government had feared. So there was some extra wriggle room there to spend money to support the economy if necessary. But on top of that, of course, the downside risks to the economy have increased. And millions of people are facing a very severe cost of living crisis over the next few months. So he had the ammunition to use, but for some reason he was very reluctant to do so. I personally would have done at least two things differently from him. One is that I would have postponed the national insurance tax increases. And it's completely bonkers to be raising taxes now. But the other is I would have done more on benefits. Even if you're not a big fan of state welfare, increasing benefits by not much more than 3% when inflation is heading for 8 or 9% makes no sense at all. And
let's talk about inflation, because, as you say, it's and it's referred to in the papers today that it's heading towards 8, 9. Some people think 10%, and yet the Office for Budget Responsibilities figures for next year, 2023. I think they're rather optimistic, assuming that it's going to be 4% or lower.
Well, I think they're probably right. There are some one-off factors that are pushing up inflation now. So obviously the big increase in energy prices. And, unless energy prices continuing rising at the same pace next year, which they almost certainly won't, then headline inflation should drop back. But of course, the level of prices will be an awful lot higher. So even if inflation falls back, we'll still be paying 10% more for our weekly shop than we would otherwise have done. So even if the inflation rate drops, the price squeeze is still there.
But of course, if you've got inflation approaching 10% this year, you're going to have massive pressure on wages. So that's surely going to boost inflation next year. I mean, once inflation's embedded in a system, it's really hard to get it out of the system, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. I mean, that's mainly an issue, I think, for the Bank of England. They have to sort of prevent expectations of higher prices from getting embedded in the system, as you put it. And I think personally that the Bank of England has been too slow to raise interest rates, and in particular to row back on all the enormous amount of money printing it's done over the last few years. So I think we should definitely be pointing a finger of blame at the Bank of England there. The immediate problem, though, is what do we do over the next few months when those additional price increases come through? And I mentioned fuel, but it's not just fuel, of course, anymore. It's now food as well, and it's spreading into other parts of the economy. So it's a broad-based pressure on inflation, which I think would have justified the Chancellor doing a lot more.
But I think Julian, you've just touched on the other reason why I think their inflation forecast next year is too optimistic, because of food price inflation, and the Ukraine crisis is going to exaggerate that in terms of the impact on grain prices and so on.
Well, I'm a relative optimist here. I think the impact of the Ukraine crisis will fade fairly quickly. I'm obviously hoping that the war is resolved satisfactorily sooner rather than later. And I think actually the economy going into this crisis had been doing relatively well. So, even in the beginning of this year when inflation was already 6% or more, the economy was holding up quite well. So I think we will be okay. But my question for the Chancellor is why take the risk? I mean, there's never a good time to raise taxes. But now is a particularly bad time. There's no sort of economic logic in raising taxes when the economy is in the midst of an enormous economic shock in the way that it is now.
Because essentially we've got a warlike situation. COVID was like a sort of wartime style emergency. And then on the back of that, we've got inflation. And now we've got the impact of the Ukraine war. We've got all of the impact on energy prices. We've got the highest taxes for 70 years and the lowest medium-term growth forecast for 60 years. And the two are so directly linked. I find it beyond me why he's not cutting taxes hard.
I think that's right. I mean, maybe he's just sort of crisis weary. We've got through the worst of the COVID pandemic, and obviously that required the government to step in and borrow and spend an enormous amount of money. Maybe he's reluctant to do that 2 years running. But if it hadn't been for COVID, I think there's no doubt at all that he would be, cutting taxes and being more generous on benefits than he would otherwise have done. And it makes perfect sense to do so. As you say, this is wartime, and during the First and Second World Wars, we borrowed far more money as a share of national income than we're likely to do over the next couple of years. That's what you do in shocks like this.
For 30 years, we had national debt that was over 150% of GDP, interest rates higher than now, and actually that makes the current sort of numbers almost comfortable at below 100% and declining.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's no particular level of debt as a share of GDP that's a problem anyway. I mean, I don't really think it matters whether it's 80% or 120%. But ironically, part of the important point about this crisis is that the increase in inflation is actually good for the public finances. So, cash incomes go up, prices go up, and, prices are higher. The government gets more money in things like fuel duty and VAT receipts and so on. Companies and people are paying a lot more tax than the Chancellor expected. So even without having to borrow more, he's got some extra fiscal space there, extra wiggle room he can use to give some of that money back. So people will be paying more in tax, but that doesn't mean you need to add to that by increasing tax rates as well.
Now, I just want to pick you up on the point that you raised about the Bank of England and base rates, because I would argue that actually where you've got inflation that's caused not by demand pull from the consumer, but actually by a supply push from the inputs. I'm not sure that raising rates really would I mean, it would have an impact, but it would be incredibly painful. That's why, for me, cutting taxes hard and then saying to people, actually, because we've cut taxes so hard, that's why we need actually much lower pay increases than the rate of inflation. But on a net basis, in your weekly pay packet, you're about even. It feels to me that's a better way to try and control inflation. Okay,
well, lots of good points in there. I mean, first of all, the Bank of England isn't raising interest rates to bring inflation down now. I mean, nobody thinks that an increase in interest rates is going to affect what's going to happen to energy prices globally over the next few months. Instead, what it's doing is sending a strong signal to everybody else in the economy that it's serious about keeping inflation down over the medium to longer term. So I think a small increase in interest rates now is worth it in order to send that signal. Remember also, interest rates are still going to remain very, very low. Sort of worst case forecasts I've seen, interest rates might go to 2, 3, maybe 3.5%, which historically is a very low level. And if you allow for the rate of inflation, it's actually negative in real terms, which is really what matters. So I don't think what the Bank of England is doing is a real threat to the economy in the short term, but it might help get inflation down over the longer term.
Interesting.
The second point is about wages. I mean, this is another, I disagree with the Bank of England. The Bank of England is saying to people, take smaller wage increases because otherwise that's inflationary. I think that's completely wrong. I think people should ask for whatever wage increase they think they can get and that they deserve, because otherwise that just make the cost of living squeeze worse. If your wages are only going up by 2% and prices going up by 8%, that's a huge shock to the economy. So I think people should ask for and get bigger pay increases this year. It's maybe future years that we need to worry about. But now, I think paying people more to keep pace with inflation is exactly the right thing to do.
And the Chancellor made a big thing about the cost of interest on his debt. But actually, of course, given that over 40% of the debt is essentially its internal Bank of England debt, and that has similar rates of interest. But a lot of the debt number he used, as I understand, essentially consolidates through back into the Treasury finances. So the number he used was sort of 80-odd billion is actually, much of that goes straight back into the government. It's not going out of the government coffers.
Yeah, this is hugely complicated. I don't think the Chancellor explained it very well. And actually, the OBR that crunched the numbers didn't explain it very well either. The 83 billion figure that he was talking about, which he described as debt interest payments, it isn't actually what it says on the tin. It isn't the amount of money that the government is going to have to pay in debt interest next year. It's basically an accounting technicality about sending your viewers to sleep on a Sunday morning too early. What basically is happening is there's a lot of government debt whose value is linked to retail price index. So when the retail price index goes up, when that debt is eventually redeemed or paid back, that costs the government more money. But that's something that's going to be spread over years or decades. It's an accounting thing. So it's not real.
Exactly. Well, I think he's overstated it. I think he's completely out of touch with what needed to be done. Julian, thank you so much for those thoughts. I really appreciate it for my listeners this Sunday morning. That's Julian Jessup, the Research Fellow at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Well, give us a call with your views, your thoughts, 0344 499 1000. What did you think of the Chancellor's statement? Text us, message us. And coming up later in the hour, we're also going to be looking at the impact of sanctions on Russia, what that's doing, whether it's working or whether it's going to hurt us more than it hurts Russia. Stay with us. You're listening to Tice Talk. It is, of course, Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Richard Tice on Talk Radio.
World headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio. Listen on DAB+.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
Richard Tice. Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk, and that was Julian Jessup just before the break with his views about the Chancellor's statement that we should be cutting taxes, and your tweets and messages are coming in thick and fast. Let me just go to a couple of them. One here from, where is it? Paul, actually. This is an important one. Richard, the UK has 2.3 trillion in debt. The lenders want their money back pronto, and us less well-off folks are paying for it. Paul, possibly, but let's remember, of that 2.3 trillion, almost a trillion of it, 900 billion, is actually basically Bank of England debt, internal debt that they created, what they call quantitative easing over the last decade, but 400 of that was for the COVID crisis. So actually, it's not 2.3 trillion is owned externally. We've got another one here from, who's this from? Jane. I genuinely don't know how people are going to cope with this cost of living crisis. It will be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And then one here from Laurie, who says, Rishi Sunak, wrong man in the wrong job at the wrong time. And Anne says the Chancellor should have raised the tax threshold to £20,000, even for just 1 year. People would spend the disposable income on the higher prices. The government have failed on the economy, immigration and law and order, the things that people vote on. And I think you are absolutely spot on. Lots of thoughts there. We've got a call. Who have we got? We've got from London, Robert. A very good morning.
Oh, morning, Richard. Richard, I come at this. I've been in the markets and investment banks, and I'm still in finance for 30 years. I remember Stuart Lawson coming onto our trading floor back in 1991, I think it was, and he was one of the greats. Him, Lamont, and the other chap.
Do you mean Nigel Lawson?
Nigel Lawson, yes. And they pulled an economy from the brink. 76 were at the IMF begging for money. What worries me in the narrative I'm seeing now, and everything is a narrative now, right, is this idea that I can see people going to blame Putin for the price increases. We printed 400 billion and counting, because there'll be more damage for COVID. I think there'll be damage from COVID lockdowns for years to come now. We printed £400 billion, and I remember trying to say at the time, this is insane, because it's just going to lead to gigantic inflation. You just simply can't print those sums of money and not have an accompanying growth in the economy without getting inflation. In America, they printed 6 trillion. Can I give you one statistic? And it's probably a similar one to us over here. In America, the number of dollars ever created in its history, 80% of those were created in the last year and a half to 2 years.
Wow.
Right. This you cannot create artificially that amount of money and not expect inflation. So I'm so sick of. I've watched so many chancellor budgets, and I've followed the US, all the major economies globally for now nearly 30 years. But when I look at the conversations we're having now, not you, just the nonsense from Rishi Sunak, it's all tinkering at the edges.
Yes.
There's only one way out of this, and it is to crash taxes, deregulate, and get the energy out of the ground. And until we do that, we are going to just...
Robert, I agree 110%. Unless you cut taxes hard and grow your way out of this, we're going to tax our way into deep recession, deep stagflation. And what infuriates me about all of this, the money that you just touched on in terms of being printed, is, see, I would say, look, what's done is done. You can't reverse it. Make it into a 75-year, like warlike bond, stick a fixed rate of 0.5% on it, and just park it in the Bank of England's computer. But by leaving it, much of it still with sort of index-linked inflation interest rates, it just makes the numbers look worse, and so they're sort of the Chancellor's doubling down unnecessarily.
Richard, I totally agree with you. What we are seeing is endless Conservative and Labour people as well, the transfers of wealth, and I'm not talking about money, but wealth, because when you create that kind of money, you could say, well, the people who get the wealth from the pharmaceutical contracts and all the rest of it, they've got cash, but they're ahead of the curve. They're able to buy commodities and diversify their portfolios in anticipation of the devaluation or the debasement of your currency. But all this endless shifting of wealth to the top, it's got to stop. It's immoral. It's unacceptable. It's cronyism, not capitalism. I'm sick of it, and I'm sick
Robert,
of the people.
I think you're quite right, and you speak for millions of people across the country. Robert, thank you so much for your call and your thoughts. We're going to head a bit further south to Surrey, where Daniel is patiently waiting. Morning, Daniel.
Morning, Richard. I'm going to speak for millions as well now when I say that this current Conservative Party, for me, people say they're out of touch. It's not that they're out of touch. They are, but it's just that they're not actually very conservative at all. I agree with you when you call them the con socialists, because as a Conservative myself, the immigration issue, one of the top 3 subjects on the doorstep in the last 6 general elections, but we're just continuously ignored. We're asking for action. We're asking for something to be done. And what happens successively over and over again? Nothing gets done. Law and order week. I've always said to you, Richard, the biggest 3 topics to a Conservative, or to most people, not even just Conservatives, are the economy, immigration and law and order. Those 3 topics are what the Conservative Party or any party are judged on. This is what we're gonna judge them on, Richard.
And the numbers on all of those 3 points, Daniel, are going south fast.
Yeah, they are, and they're failing on every... so they keep piping up going, yes, we've discounted 5p off a litre of fuel, and the green net zero's going well. They're not reading the room. I'm having to stop and go, excuse me, you don't know your electorate, you don't know who's voting for you, you don't know how the majority of British people think and feel. We've told you successively we want the economy to thrive, we want law and order someone to get a grip of it, and we want you to stop this outrageous immigration. 67 million people in the country.
Daniel, you wait until the consensus, the census numbers come out. When they come out, my forecast is that actually it'll be 70 million. But
Richard, do you know in 1951, the census of 1951, less than one man's lifetime ago, it showed us that 98.8% of the population were white, broadly Christian, and spoke English as a first language. Yet in less than one man's lifetime, we've got this complete and utter mess we've got today that no one ever wanted or asked for. We were never asked if we wanted this. This wholesale change and mass immigration was shoved down our throats successively in less than one man's lifetime, and we didn't want or ask for it. Now that people are saying, look, we want it stopped, we want this change stopped, the governors of our country, the people that rule it, are deaf.
Well, the truth is that they are not telling us the honest facts. And the idea, I'm going to be touching on it later in the show, that this nationality and borders bill is going to make the blindest bit of difference is for the birds. I did ask Daniel, I asked the Minister for Immigration, Tom Pursglove, to come on the show, and he didn't answer my message, my invitation. So I think that probably says a lot. They know, in reality, it's going to make no difference whatsoever. Daniel, thank you so much. I appreciate your call. I think you do speak for millions of people as well. And lots of messages coming in. One here from Phil, who says, remember, Dishi Rishi has deliberately stuffed the poorest and most vulnerable by pegging the state pensions when the elderly need the help most. Another one saying from Robin, saying, what about a pay rise for pensioners? We're going to be hardest hit because we can't make up our income with overtime or a second job. Both my wife and I have health problems. I mean, I think it is a good point. You had the triple lock, and essentially the government's got to make a decision on that. They've deferred it for 1 year, and of course inflation is going through the roof. Karen here messages, I thought the job of the government, I think she says the job of the Hoover, and I think presumably mean the government, was to make the lives of the country's citizens better. However, the Chancellor seems adamant to make them worse and views the poor with contempt. His budget offered nothing for anyone, in my opinion. 5p for petrol is an insult, negligible when it's gone up by 50p or more. I mean, that's right. I remember that during the first lockdown, I was buying diesel at £1.05 per litre. So it's just an indication of the sort of price rises that we have seen. Keep those messages, those tweets, those calls coming in. And bless, this is Lynn from Staines. Lynn says, well, out of touch is far too kind for this Chancellor. He's incompetent, pushing more people into poverty, out of work and onto benefits or food banks. Not sure this is the way forward. Lynn, I really am very, very concerned. I don't think I've ever been more concerned than I am now. Alice asked me the question, here we go, Alice. Are there about to be protests about what the government is doing to us? or are we going to take it lying down again? We should be more like France. Well, certainly the French, when they get angry about something, they are straight down the Champs-Élysées with their straw bales, with their tractors, making their views very clearly heard. And, you know, I'm a great defender of the right to protest as long as it's lawful and legal. But I do think people are going to get increasingly cross as these bills rise and rise. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000, with your thoughts and your views. Coming up after the break, we are going to be talking about the sanctions, the impact of sanctions on the Russian economy, the Russian people. I've got a great specialist on that, and what also may be the impact on ourselves. Another reason, surely, to be cutting taxes to make sure that we grow the economy. So I want your views and your thoughts. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk. It is the first hour here on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
21st century debate.
Speak once, think twice.
Talk Radio.
Exhalation, conversation,
Confrontation.
plain talking, common sense. Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We're well through the first hour. We've had some great calls, some great messages, some great tweets. Keep them coming because I want to hear your experiences, your concerns, how it's impacting you, your business, if you're an entrepreneur, what you think the implications of all of this is. And, you know, my view is that the Chancellor is out of touch, hasn't done anything enough. And yes, the impact or the reason for some of these problems is partly because of the increase in prices because of the energy crisis and what's going on in Ukraine on food costs and things. And that's why it's right to look at the impact of the sanctions that the West has quite rightly imposed on Russia. And I want to look at the extent to which they're impacting not only on the Russian economy, but also the impact on ourselves, our own economy here in the West. So I'm delighted now to be joined by Michael Gasoriak, the Professor of Economics at the University of Sussex, also Managing Director of Inter-Analysis. Michael, thank you very much for joining me on Tice Talk. And this is, these sanctions that we've imposed, clearly, I think everyone accepts they are more united and stronger and deeper than perhaps people in Russia might have thought. It's the first time in our lifetime, in a sense, all of us has experienced this. What do you think is the impact? How quickly is it being felt in Russia, if it is being felt, and what may be the impact sort of over the next month or two?
Yeah, I think you're right that the sanctions and the coordination of the sanctions has been fairly unprecedented. In order for sanctions to work, in order for them to be effective, it's important that they can't be evaded, that the country, in this case Russia, that you're imposing the sanctions against, can't find ways of evading those sanctions. That means that the sanctions have to be fairly well targeted and there has to be a lot of coordination between countries. So any individual country levying sanctions against Russia, that would not be very effective. What we've seen, which is really quite remarkable, is a very, very wide range of sanctions against individuals through the freezing of assets, against the state, if you like, through the freezing of foreign exchange reserves, through the SWIFT international payment system, making it much harder for banking payments to be made, and bans on trade, export bans on certain goods, import restrictions, and the recent introduction of tariffs. This is a really very, very wide range of sanctions against Russia, and it's been very, very coordinated by the West. And the short answer is that I think they're being very effective. Now, it's very hard to know exactly how effective because we don't have the information. And a lot of what we hear is, if you like, hearsay. But there are recent estimates suggesting that, for example, Russian GDP this year may decline by up to 15%. Now, that's a very, very big hit.
That's massive, 15%. I mean, that's 50% higher than the hit we took in the COVID crisis.
Exactly. It's much higher than the impact of COVID. And in a sense, that's not surprising. Global economies are increasingly quite integrated. They buy and sell from each other, inputs and parts and final goods and so on. And we're imposing a massive range of sanctions against Russia that will indeed impact on the Russian economy, is indeed immediately impacting on the Russian economy. We hear stories of queues in shops and lack of things on the shelves and so on. And that will continue to happen.
So if it is impacting, I guess the next question is, as long as we maintain the sanctions, then that will continue and deepen. To what extent does the reverse then happen? There's an impact on ourselves, on our own economy, particularly if Putin then starts to tighten the supply of some of the goods that Russia exports, in particular, for example, obviously there's gas, but also some of the precious metals and things like nickel.
Yes, no, that's entirely correct. But before I just answer that question, let me just say one other thing about the effectiveness of sanctions. So the sanctions are being very effective, economically speaking, but clearly the intention is not to hurt the Russian people per se, but the intention by the West is to change Russian policy. Much harder to assess at this point the extent to which the sanctions are effective in changing Russian policy or possibly even leading to regime change. Now, I'm sure Western governments, as we saw yesterday with Biden, don't want to overtly talk about regime change. But I'm sure that underlying many of these actions is that they do desire regime change, that Putin is seen as an unstable, megalomaniac dictator, and there'll be a desire to change that. Now, turning to your question about the impact on the UK economy, if you think about the direct impact in terms of how much we trade with Russia, it's small. So about 2% of our imports come from Russia, less than 1% of our exports go to Russia. So those direct effects are likely to be fairly small, but the indirect effects are likely to be bigger. So just because we might not import much wheat from Russia or the Ukraine, and globally Russia and Ukraine supply between 25 and 30% of wheat, but for the UK it's a tiny share of our imports of wheat. Just because we don't import much wheat doesn't mean that we're not affected by the global price rises of wheat, for example. These are commodities where the price is set on world markets, and therefore as the world prices rise, all our imports, the price of our imports rise as well.
So that hits us hard on inflation, which I touched on earlier. And just going back then to, you touched on the potential sort of internal regime change if the sanctions really hurt. And I see that. I guess one question that's starting to emerge, in the event that there's some form of, and we all pray for, an early ceasefire, an early stop to the war, do you think that the West will continue the sanctions for as long as Putin remains in charge, or do you think there will be pressure to ease the Russian sanctions quite quickly, even if he remains the boss?
Hard to predict. My guess almost certainly is that if the war were to stop, or there to be a ceasefire, and there's a resolution or a beginnings of a resolution to the crisis, there will be a slow easing of the sanctions. I don't think that there would be a requirement that the regime has to change in order for sanctions to be lifted.
Okay, because that's obviously going to be quite some people are now talking about, we've got to provide Putin with a way out. And I guess part of that way out for him, if he's struggling on the ground to the extent that it appears, is whether or not actually he's going to ask for the sanctions to be lifted.
Yes, and I suspect that there could be some lifting of sanctions depending on the extent of the ceasefire and the extent and the nature of the resolution. Putin has been seriously weakened both internationally and domestically by this crisis. There is little doubt of that. Therefore, my guess, but this is pure speculation, and I'm not a political scientist, but my guess is that in due course there will be a regime change, but it's not going to happen in the next few months. It could do, but there's no immediate evidence that will happen in the next few months, but it will happen over the more medium to longer term.
That's right. Michael, that's so helpful. Thank you very much indeed. That was Michael Gasoriak, Professor of Economics at the University of Sussex, with his views on sanctions. Really interesting to hear that. Coming up, we're going to be talking about, after the news, we're going to talk about what's going on militarily on the ground in Ukraine, looking at all of that, and also looking at the potential for food shortages around the world. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Mid-morning talk.
Sunday talk.
Talk Radio.
Take a chance with the Tice Man.
Talk Radio.
Richard Tice.
Sunday morning devotion, there isn't a sermon.
Talk Radio's Common Sense Weekend.
Richard Tice.
On Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We are into the second hour. We were just talking there about sanctions, the impact on Russia, and Michael has tweeted in, why doesn't the West say to Putin, Russia will be, or to say to Russia, you'll be isolated from the West as long as he remains the president, unless he pulls out of Ukraine instantly. I can't stand for it, Michael says, that we continue, that NATO is holding back whilst watching Putin slaughtering our neighbour. Well, there we are. That's one view. And we also need to sort of think about, well, actually, how is the invasion going relative to what Putin and his generals thought? And that's why I'm delighted to be joined in the studio by Henry Bolton, OBE, former leader of the EU's crisis response team in Ukraine. Henry, very good morning. Thanks for coming to the studio. So there's a very interesting sort of double-page spread in the Sunday Times today. And one of the headline is outfoxed, outfought, and now the Russian invaders are outnumbered. I mean, it's obviously, I guess you have to sort of be careful about what we read, sort of propaganda both ways, misinformation. How do you think it's going for the Russian army relative to what they really thought?
It's going a lot worse, unquestionably. But I think we have to be careful when we make assumptions about what they're capable of doing in terms of adjusting, because the Russian tactical doctrine, how they fight wars, is to send the lightly equipped and armed troops first as a sort of reconnaissance screening force, and then they build up echelons behind. Now, we would expect our junior commanders, our corporals, our sergeants, our platoon commanders and so on, to use initiative, to understand their commander's intention and to anticipate what needs to be done. But in the Russian army, it's very different. It works almost according to a timetable. And when you've got those echelons moving forward with ever heavier equipment, they tend to get into a logjam if something goes wrong. The idea being that ultimately the weight will break through the logjam. In this case, it hasn't. But I think we should be careful about riding off the Russian army at the moment. President Putin, a month or so ago, signed the presidential order, as he does every 2 years or so, for the call-up of 135,000 conscripts. That starts on April the 1st. So he's got a pipeline of additional manpower coming through. But in addition to that, as the Russian Ministry of Defense has said, there is a new evolution in the conflict, if you like. They're going to concentrate on Donetsk and Luhansk, which I said before the conflict broke out were going to be their priorities, to secure those, and a land corridor from Russia to the Crimea, whilst digging in north of Kiev. And they will stay there until I think Putin's objective is to consolidate in the southeast and stay threatening Kiev until such time as he
the interesting thing was
agreement.
That before he invaded, people were saying, well, the Russian army is well equipped, they're well trained, and it would be a matter of days before they're in Kyiv. Yet now, actually, hard to know the exact numbers, but it's very likely that the Russians have lost many more than 1,000 troops.
They're probably nearer 13,000, and
that's just in a few weeks. You compare that to, for example, the US lost just over 2,000 troops in a 20-year Afghan war. So these are big numbers.
They are. I mean, they're almost already up to the numbers that the Soviet Union lost in total in the 10 years they were in Afghanistan.
So do you think it's likely that he may, instead of sort of committing more troops, actually just sort of hold back a bit and just keep shelling and tragically, horrifically, just flattening town after town after city after city?
Indeed. And that, again, is not just what we've seen in Grozny, in Chechnya, in the Chechen War, and not only what we've seen in Aleppo in the Syrian war, but it's actually also according to their textbook way of doing it. The Russians in World War II very much understood, well, after the experience of having taken Berlin, of having fought in Stalingrad and so on, they understand that fighting in towns and cities is immensely expensive in terms of blood and treasure, and it just absorbs resources. So instead of doing that, their doctrine is to stand back and pummel the town into submission.
And I guess with ever bigger weapons. And
yeah, correct.
Obviously the fear now is, might they go to chemical weapons, and then even worse, small tactical nuclear weapons. Have they really got chemical weapons?
They undoubtedly do have chemical weapons, and I say undoubtedly do because there's been a lot of difficulty around. There's a treaty that governs the manufacture, storage, and use of chemical weapons, and there are inspection regimes related to that, and those inspection regimes are incredibly difficult to carry out in the Russian Federation, which suggests that they've got something to hide in that regard. Tactical nuclear, battlefield nuclear weapons are incredibly dangerous, not only because of what they are, they're nuclear, we're sort of escalating in type of weaponry, but also the blast. But there are two levels, and people should understand this. There is, at the battlefield level, the Russians have the capability to launch an artillery shell that would create a blast, if listeners remember, the blast that occurred in Beirut harbour, in the port there. And the blast of one of these things that the Russians can launch is anything between 2 and 5 times that. And so it's absolutely devastating, but it's not necessarily something that would lead to a sort of a nuclear exchange. No, that's not thermobaric. Thermobaric is a missile or bomb that it creates a vapour before it detonates. So when it bursts and creates a vapour, sometimes a powder, and then detonates. And the effect of that is, I mean, in times gone by, windmills and so on, ground flour would have quite devastating explosions because of the powder in the air. It ignites and detonates. And this works on that basis. The problem with it is that it just absorbs all of the oxygen in the area, and it's rather like a gas explosion as well as a conventional shell detonating. So it's incredibly damaging.
And we think they've used those certainly a little bit.
They absolutely have.
So they could continue to do that. I just want to then move on, please, Henry, to... We've had the news this week, obviously, of NATO meeting and announcing troop deployments to some of the East European nations. To what extent is that good headline-grabbing spin? Or, I mean, actually, are the troops really available in the various NATO countries to send to those East European states?
Yes. I mean, at the moment, we've got battle groups which are larger than the Russian battle groups, so heading for twice the size, really. One in Estonia, one in Latvia, one in Lithuania, and we've also got troops in Poland, plus the armies that are there as well. Backing them up, of course, there's deployment available. So, and the Americans have got, at the moment, it's around about 70 to 80,000 in Europe who could be deployed forward, and they've got the reserves of equipment as well. This is more a signalling, and indeed, I think our first response should Putin, and I don't think at this stage he will, because he is fully tied up.
Yeah.
And he's also got problems in another part of the world, Nagorno-Karabakh, between Azerbaijan and Armenia, that kicked off sort of yesterday, really. Small conflict down there that he's got to deal with. But so he's got his hands full at the moment. I don't see him going into NATO territory right now. If he did, it would be air power initially that caused him immense damage, and it would. So I don't think he's going to go there now. Problem is, there is increasing mood, I think, in Europe, in mainland Europe, to try and get a negotiated settlement. Give, it's been used the phrase, an off-ramp for Putin. If Putin is able to survive this conflict politically in Russia, this story does not go away.
So that then has a real impact on our future defence spending requirement.
Medium, long-term security impact on this continent will be massive.
So we've seen Germany commit to making substantial increases in spending, quite rightly. They've been very, very short on that for decades.
They have.
Partly for understandable reasons, but, they've never even met their 2% NATO commitments. But for ourselves, we're give or take spending 2%, maybe with a little bit of fiddling of some of the numbers. But I mean, some people are saying we need to go to 3%. Yeah. Where are you on that?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily percentage terms, and I'll be honest with you, Richard, I haven't sort of worked out the cost implications of what I think we should do. What we've had an emphasis on high-tech, lightly equipped military for the last few years in the UK. That's cheaper than buying sort of large sort of Challenger tanks, but we're reducing, I think, our armoured formations too much. We're going to have 127 main battle tanks. I mean, this is half of what even neutral Switzerland has, and and people are looking at what's happening in Ukraine and saying the Russian armour is being devastated. It is, but Russian armour is not the same as British, German, or American armour. We've got a very different approach to building our tanks. The Russian approach has thankfully been proven to have been a mistaken one. So we need to look carefully, and we need another strategic defence review in relation to in light of what is going on now.
But the recent increases in spending that was announced, I think, just back end of last year, and that was all focused on, as you say, on sort of technology, on cyber, but actually we need more boots on the ground.
We do.
And unfortunately, at the moment, the current plans is to reduce boots on the ground.
Absolutely correct. That's the plan. And, yes, we cannot neglect the high tech. It's incredibly important. We've seen that in this war as well. But there's a military sort of principle that has existed forever, I think, and that is you cannot hold ground unless you are sitting on it, and you need people to sit on it, and you need to be able to sort of occupy that area. Otherwise, you don't fully control it. You can deny it to the enemy,
yes,
but you cannot fully control it.
Well, I think that is going to be part of the big future debate, is how much we need to be spending on defence. We need more boots on the ground. Henry, thank you so much for those thoughts. And in order to be able to afford more money on defence, guess what, everybody? Yes, we need to grow the economy faster in order to create tax revenues to pay for that. And that, Mr. Chancellor, Mr. Prime Minister, means you've got to cut taxes and cut them hard to create growth. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000, or send us a tweet or a text message with your thoughts, your views. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
Open discussion, healthy debate. Talk Radio. Listen, digest, repeat, understand.
Smart people, smart speaker, smart TV.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We are well into the second hour. That was Henry Bolton there with his views about what's going on in Ukraine, how the Russian military is performing or not, and the implications. And then the implications also for us in terms of what we need to be spending on defence. And of course, that means growing the economy. Meanwhile, we've got some great messages coming in. Jan has tweeted in, we've a small family building business, and what with the rocketing price of building materials, subcontractor costs and fuel, there's no way we can increase wages. I can't see people being able to do renovation work, so he can see their workload decreasing. Interesting thoughts there. And we've got one here from Leslie who says, I'm a pensioner, voted Tory all my life. This is not a Tory government. We and all lower income families are suffering the most, but come the next election, they'll realise who actually bothers to go out and vote. And I guarantee the pensioners will not be voting for this fake Tory government again. There we are. That's interesting from Leslie. And from Thailand, yes, Tice Talk is international. Talk Radio is international. We have the chosen one who's tweeted in from Thailand. The mess we're in is partly due to lockdown policy over the last 2 years. Please never get tired of reminding listeners of this, because the politicians are getting away with it, blaming it all on Putin. Actually, I think that's a good point. A lot of the energy crisis is totally self-inflicted by this Tory government and previous Tory governments over the last decade. Quite right there. Now, we've got a couple of calls here. We've got Craig, who is in Oxford. Morning, Craig.
Good morning. How are you?
Well, I mean, I'm fine, but I'm just irritated and frustrated. What about you?
I'm in a similar boat. It feels like I'm the only one awake and alive to see the situation as it is. It's not just an economy crisis we've got. The entire country is knackered. The entire way in which the country is governed and run is quite frankly, a joke and no longer fit for purpose. The pool that our politicians has been pulled from, their key kind of attributes and abilities seem to be question dodging and went to jeer during their weekly pantomime. They're not skilled for the positions they've been put themselves in. If you want someone to run the economy, get a panel of economists to run the economy, not these numpties that are being elected for Eton. And
the bizarre thing is, Craig, is that actually, I mean, the Chancellor, he comes from the city, he's got a finance background. If anybody should know and understand, actually, in theory, his CV looks as though he would, he could, and he should, and yet actually what we're seeing is the complete opposite.
Yeah, but again, it's not just the economy. I mean, he's not doing a great job, but it's the entire way in which the country is run. You look at the education system, which I know is a bit of a change of pace. It's not fit for purpose. You can't take 350,000 individual kids into a rigid, structured system that hasn't been updated since the computer revolution took over, pump them through it and expect to get shelf sackers to rocket scientists at the end. It's like taking everything out of your fridge, boiling it for 10 minutes and expecting it to all come out perfect. It's never going to work. We're in such a mess.
It is. I think it's in so many areas, so many institutions. Actually, it's a failure of leadership. It's a failure of management, doing things properly. And, you know, my concern is that the COVID crisis and so many civil servants still working from home, not pulling their weight, and therefore, in a sense, productivity in the public sector is just collapsing.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to clear house. The whole system, top to bottom, and unfortunately, we're not going to get it without some form of revolution, because they are simply, from elected politicians to the civil service, are not fit to carry out the job.
Well, what we need is we need an electoral revolution, Craig. Thank you so much for your thoughts. There we are. That is Craig, who says it's not just the economy, it's the whole country that is in a mess. Let's head, I think, northwest from Oxford to Worcestershire, where Nick has some thoughts. Morning, Nick.
Morning. Yeah, I agree with everything that guy said. Everything's knackered. I've got a transport company, and this fuel situation, and I just hear this out, and the figures aren't exact. If the Chancellor were to put VAT upon fuel to 40%, reduce, 40p then, that's 40%, reduce the fuel duty by the same amount in a figure. All industry, transport, whatever, would be able to claim that VAT back. All right, the man on the street can't. He would still have to pay it. But it would gradually bring inflation down because you're not paying the inflated transport prices. So the man on the street would feel the benefit over a small period of time, because transport is one of the biggest costs of any product.
Yeah, I get you, and I get what you're saying. So actually, what you're really saying is that if the Chancellor almost swapped the duty on fuel for businesses from a fixed rate to a higher VAT percentage, then you can reclaim that. That would reduce your costs, and so that would help reduce it. It's a very interesting point, Nick. And also, just whilst I've got you on the issue of fuel, we're approaching April the 1st when there's a huge increase on what's called red diesel, isn't there? And that's going to have a massive damaging effect on inflation, I understand.
Yes, my son was sort of talking about the other day. He works for a brick manufacturer, got their own quarry. It's a bespoke brick manufacturer. He's one of the gaffers there, and he was saying that all the plant, your dumpers, your diggers, everything that runs on red diesel, now we will be taxed the same as, well, if they buy it, they might just buy normal diesel, I don't know. But that will push the price of all the bricks up. Their gas bill, something like 50 grand a month increase. So, yeah, it's absolutely mental.
I mean, I talked in my Sunday sermon about the Chancellor being out of touch. He just doesn't seem to understand that if you raise taxes for businesses, they've got to pass that on in order for them to be able to survive. And inflation goes up, prices go up, and things will slow down. It's utterly mind-boggling. Nick, thank you so much for your thoughts. That was Nick in Worcestershire. He runs a transport business. He's concerned about the impact of all those cost increases. I think just before we go to the break, we've got David in further north in Sheffield. Hi, David. Have we got you there, David?
You have indeed. Can you hear me?
Only just. Keep trying, otherwise we may have to try and get you back.
Yeah, well,
that's better.
You're okay. What it was, Richard, I wanted to know primarily at the next general election whether Reform Party is likely to be putting in more candidates across the UK, because we keep hearing this thing about, you can't vote for these other type of parties because you'll let either Labour or whatever in. But frankly, I'm sick to the back teeth of this lot we're running government at the moment.
Well, I can help you out with that, David, because our plan is very clear. I've talked about it loudly, and I'll keep talking about it. We're going to be standing candidates across the whole of England, Scotland and Wales. We won't do Northern Ireland. So give or take, it'll be around 600 candidates, and we are taking applications. So that hopefully answers your question.
Well, that does, yes. The thing is, I should definitely vote because, this lot that's in now is not a Conservative government at all. And the points that have already been made numerously about their lack of competence, it was completely out of touch with people. This latest spring statement that Rishi Sunak made was a joke, frankly. It really was. He's talking about taking 5% off heat pumps and
it's just that was so out of touch. The point is, only people who've got lots of spare cash could afford to spend money on heat insulation and heat pumps and the like, and renovations. Unbelievable. Mind-boggling. David, thank you very much for your call. That was David in Sheffield with his concerns as well. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Messages coming in. Susan has tweeted in, I fear due to the rise in the cost of living, the quality of life for so many people will decrease. So much so we may also see a rise in anxiety and depression, and that the health of the nation as well as the wealth of the nation may be affected. Good point, Susan. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Coming up after the break, we will be talking about the impact of Ukraine not planting this year's crop, potential world food shortages, price increases, the impact on Africa. So stay with us. You are, of course, listening here to Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Richard Tice on Talk Radio. Common Sense Radio for common sense people.
Talk Radio. Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
Richard Tice. Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. It is just after 11:30. We're halfway through the second hour. Lots of messages coming in response to some of those calls, what we've been discussing. Good point here from Lady Anne, who does correct me on this point about VAT or tax on fuel. She says, remember, not all businesses are registered for VAT, Richard. You're quite right, Lady Anne. Actually, I don't know what percentage are. I suspect it's the majority, but if you have got that information, do let us know. So yes, in a sense, it's not going to work for everybody, but it might work for a significant percentage. Anyway, we have, I think, got from East Anglia on the line. We've got John. Hello, John.
Hello, Richard. Couple of very small points. Hang on, I'm just going to move to a better position so you can hear me.
Oh, perfect. That would help. Thank you.
Yeah, couple of small points. The guy talking about the red diesel, absolutely on the money. I'm in a building trade. I subcontract to somebody. I was speaking to him the other week. Now, I can't remember because that was a small conversation, but maybe, I think he's telling me he uses either 6,000 or 60,000 litres a month. Okay?
A big number.
The costs are going to go through the roof, okay? All your bricks, everything like that, your guys right, they're all produced using machines with red diesel, all the transportation costs, red diesel, all the dumpers, the diggers on sites which provide the groundworks and everything, red diesel, the costs are going to go up. Also, very briefly, heat pumps. There's a bit of a white elephant in the room, Richard.
Oh, do tell me.
No, what they don't tell you is I'm actually standing outside one of the houses I'm working in right now. Lovely looking house, £750,000. Right, okay. They are all pressure tested. All modern houses for the last few years have to have a pressure test. So what happens is some guy goes in, he's got a special computer, and a fan blows through, and it detects the pressures in each room, and it can tell by volume of air how much of that pressure is escaping from gaps and everything like that. What the modern builders do, even behind all the skirtings and everything, where the plaster reaches nearly to the floor, all those gaps are sealed up in all the kitchens and everything, all the base lines on the skirtings.
So that reduces the air circulation. That makes it easier for heat pumps to work in modern, very new buildings.
Bingo.
But
no. In anything older, maybe 20 years or less, there ain't none of that. That doesn't happen. And those heat pumps are going to have to work much harder, and they're going to have there's going to be like continuation, because the temperature sensor on them, a lot of the heat pumps go into underfloor heating. Yeah. So the base temperature in that room is never, you know, if you're looking to 20 degrees, the effort to get it there is going to be a lot more.
So this is the point, isn't it? And this is the complete myth. Yes, they might work in a hermetically sealed, low air movement, brand new home.
Yes.
But they're not going to keep rooms warm with the same radiators in most people's homes. So you've either got to have much bigger radiators, as I understand, or basically you've got to wear a jumper.
Well, here's another little bit very quickly for Rich. I know you have a busy show. With the heat pump, we had an issue here the other day. Your plumber can't come out and fit that heat pump. You have to have a registered engineer for the heat pumps coming out. So there's going to be a cost issue with that. I mean, the guy I was speaking to the other day, he'd driven there. He's on his second job of the day, but he was 300 miles in for the day. You know, and also heat pumps make noise.
Oh, they do, aren't they? Yeah, they really do. They're noisy. John, you're so right. So you've got a chancellor that's deliberately stoking inflation by increasing the duty on red diesel, and quite as you say, these heat pumps, they don't work in the vast majority of houses. They'll be more expensive, more noisy, and more inefficient. Utterly unbelievable. Thank you, John, for your call from East Anglia. Now, I'm going to go to my next guest to talk about the impact of the Ukraine situation on food shortages. I'm delighted to be joined now by Monica Totova, who's an economist with the Food and Agricultural Organization at the UN. Monica, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. We've been talking about, obviously, the inflationary impact, not just here in the UK, but across the world from so many factors, energy, but also the rising food prices and potential food shortages is obviously a looming issue. Help my listeners, please, and thanks for joining me, with your sense as to how serious this could get.
All right. Good morning, Richard. Thank you for having me. Good morning from Rome. Let me give you first a little background about the situation we are right now, and why this war in Ukraine is coming at a moment when it can have very significant impact on the world supply and also the prices of food. So we were already in an environment of very high international food prices. In February, before the war started, the FAO food price index, which you might have captured, but if you didn't, doesn't matter. But the food quotations were at record high levels, even higher than we had about 10 years ago in 2021, when we talked about the last food crisis, right? So the prices were high because of the supply and demand conditions, but also high prices of energy. You spoke about energy, fertilizers, and other agricultural inputs. So we have very high prices. Then we have in this conflict involved two countries that are very big producers, very big agricultural producers, very significant producers. Between the two of them in 2021, they supplied about 30% of the wheat that was traded in the world, which is a very significant amount. They are also important exporters of other agricultural commodities such as sunflower seed or barley, maize, etc.
And so, Monica, in terms of Ukraine, it's presumably very likely that their harvest this year just won't be planted almost anywhere.
No, I would not worry about the wheat harvest, right? Because the wheat in Ukraine, it's winter wheat, right? So this wheat was already planted in October, November last year. and it's going to be harvested from June onwards. Right, June, July.
So
now, how much is going to be harvested? You know, that's the next question.
That's the question, isn't it? The size of the harvest relative to normal and the impact on food prices.
So we have the harvest that the farmers harvested. They are dedicated. The government of Ukraine introduced special measures. So the people, the farmers, the workers on the farms that could be mobilized will not be mobilized in the time they need to attend to their fields, but still some of the fields will not be harvested because they are damaged. They are damaged by shelling, etc. There are different estimates at this point, whether it will be 20%, whether it will be 40%, it is to be seen. But at the same time, you have shortages of fuel, right? So whether the farmers will have enough fuel to go and harvest, that is the next question.
And then also President Zelensky, understandably, I think I'm right in saying, has banned exports of foods at the moment to ensure that he's got enough food for his own population. Is that right?
Well, that is right. But at the same time, 90% of the agricultural exports from Ukraine are coming from Black Sea. So you cannot really enter with the ships to the Black Sea. I mean, you can, but it's very expensive also. Because even from other ports, right, the insurance premium on the vessels to go to that area, generally also to the area closer to Russia, it's very expensive for ships to go there.
And so if the exports are much lower, and I think I'm right in saying the majority of those exports go to Africa, and therefore that has really significant consequences on the quantity and the price of food in Africa.
Well, most of the exports from the Black Sea region in general, they are going a lot of it are going to the North Africa and Near East. And that's for the regional proximity, so you have a lot of shipping costs, all right? Now, of course, there are other countries that are importing from the area, but overall, whether you were importing before from Russia, whether you were importing as a country before from Ukraine, you have to be on the market and you are going to pay high prices. Whether or not you were importing from the specific country before. So you have higher prices and you will have higher shipping costs because of the high energy prices.
So it's like it's a really brutal, vicious circle of less supply of grain, higher energy costs, higher fuel prices. I mean, in terms of the UN, how concerned is the UN about this and how long this might last?
Well, we don't know, unfortunately, how long this is going to last. We don't know about the intensity of the conflict, about the possible damages. Let me also mention that the farmers now in Ukraine are preparing to sow the spring crops. So that would be maize, that would be sunflower, for example. Just mentioning the most important one, all right? So the FAO is trying to make sure that these farmers are on the fields and they have the resources available so they can continue farming. There were already some estimates that they might plant, some sources say 30% less, some sources I saw 50% less. But also, if you think about a crop like a sunflower seed, it mostly goes for exports. So if the exports are not certain, the farmers might choose to plant a crop that is more significant for the local food security. Right? So for the UN, the implications are, for FAO, we try to support the farmers so they can continue what they are supposed to be doing, and that's to produce food. Other UN agencies are also on the ground. WFP, the World Food Programme, is on the ground supporting the internally displaced, supporting the refugees, etc. Now, what these higher prices mean is that the World Food Programme, for example, suddenly has to pay much more.
Yes.
Right? Because it also buys on the markets.
Of course, Monica, that's so helpful. Thank you so much for those thoughts from the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN, Monica Totova from Rome, I think she was, with those thoughts. And I'm afraid none of that is good news. It's all challenging. It's all difficult. You've got inflation, you've got shortages, all of which means, Mr. Chancellor, you've actually got to cut taxes in order to mitigate the impact. And yet, what's he doing? He's increasing taxes, which is simply unbelievable. So thank you very much for that. We've got Michael here. He's tweeted in, we're a country run by public schoolboy Oxbridge numpties who have zero understanding of real people's lives. I like it. Don't blame COVID, blame the government's handling of it. That's absolutely right. And we've got another message in here. Heat pumps. This is really important because this is government strategy. Heat pumps are great for large new builds with underfloor heating, solar and power, but they won't put gas into the millions of existing perfectly decent, efficient boilers installed throughout the nation. Harvest the gas beneath our feet and from the North Sea. Simple. I agree 110%. Thank you very much for that. Keep the calls coming in, keep the tweets and messages. That's what makes a great show. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
Smooth, strong, and very long.
Tell your ears to chew on this.
We think what you say.
Thoughtful in your thinking.
The home of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We are well into the second hour, approaching midday. Now, we've had some tough news, some difficult news about inflation, taxes going up. So I thought maybe I'd just lighten the mood a bit. Take a deep sigh, everybody. Make sure you're sitting down, because whilst we're all struggling and short of cash, it appears, yes, there's rather a lot of cash swilling around in the public sector. So much so that I'm going to talk about my current non-job of the week. The waste in government across various departments is legendary, and it infuriates me, and I'm sure it infuriates all of you. And this week's non-job is in the Department for International Trade, where you can apply to be the head of clean growth. Now, I don't think I'm talking about, using a Gillette razor to shave a beard or anything. No. The head of clean growth, for which you'll receive the salary of £72,000, plus pensions and other benefits, 72 grand. You will be involved in heading up a team who will embed clean growth principles across the department and share lessons learned from our experience in energy. Great. You'll promote UK's clean investment and export offers. You'll work with other departments. Lovely. And more important, you'll be a focal point for clean and green issues. Oh, and by the way, aren't you lucky? The day-to-day work is varied. Oh, and you're allowed. Yes, big ideas are welcomed. Well, let me tell you, whoever's put this job out, the best idea, the biggest idea, is don't employ the person in the first place. Save 72 grand plus all the cost, 100 grand, and start cutting taxes. That is my non-job of the week. I think it's an outrage that the public sector is continuing to waste our cash on these ridiculous jobs. Anyway, there we are. That's my rant. What have we got? We've got a tweet here from Sue who says, Richard, is it possible that the government could deal with more than one issue at a time? Good question. Hundreds of thousands of government people saying they can only deal with Brexit, COVID, then the Ukraine thing. What about the economy, one at a time? I think you're right, actually. I mean, there is a lot going on. But yes, you need civil servants to deal with various things. What you don't need is a civil servant to be 100 grand a year person who's the head of clean growth, for heaven's sake. Anyway, let's see what Dave in Essex thinks to all of that. Good morning, Dave.
Oh, good morning, Richard. May I say Happy Mother's Day, and may I begin by saying I'd like to join the growing chorus of listeners who have been constantly phoning in all week because I've been listening, and they've been applauding the talk radio broadcaster for allowing an antithetical view to be heard. So I'm grateful for that. And I'd like to say all these people that are running around like chickens with no heads talking about nuclear war and nuclear weapons, I'd like to remind everybody that nuclear weapons have already been used in Iraq with depleted uranium. That was a suspect in the Gulf War syndrome, the alleged Gulf War syndrome, whose records were kept in the Oklahoma building and whose subsequent records were kept in Building 7 that was miraculously destroyed without being touched on 9/11.
Dave, you're heading into interesting territory that I'm not aware of. I'm not sure the listeners are. But, this is the home of free speech and common sense. I just don't know the veracity of all of that. What else is on your mind, Dave?
Well, I'd just like to say, I'm astounded that our military assets are running around talking freely about Vladimir Putin using nuclear weapons. It's almost as if they're setting this guy up. It's like they're trying to make out that he's weakened, that he's ready to make a drastic move. And Joe Biden talking about, the use of chemical. Man, this is a setup, and we're being sleepwalked into war. And I just wish, I wish.
Well,
I wish we had a figure. I wish we had a figure like Harold Wilson.
Yeah, in fairness, though, Dave, actually, the reason that the West and NATO has resisted the repeated calls from Zelensky for example, a no-fly zone is actually to try and avoid the very thing that you're concerned about. So I think actually the West is doing everything it can to try and avoid that. But I take your point of view, which may be slightly different. Dave, thanks very much for that call. We've got lots of people. The switchboard is busy. Tony is in Hastings. Morning, Tony.
Good morning, Richard. How are you?
Well, I'm okay. I'm still here. I just, as I said earlier, irritated and frustrated. What about you?
Oh, I'm good, thanks. I appreciate that you're a champion for us ordinary British people who just want a fair deal. Anyway, what I've rang about is solar panels. Because of the rising cost of energy, and it isn't going to ever come down, it's one of the things I want to do to save me money.
Yes.
And I think they really do work. I live on the south coast, so I get more sunshine. What is irritating is the fact that you might spend, say, $8,000 on panels to generate electricity, use what you can. When you come to sell it to the grid, they're giving you at the moment about less than 20% of the price they'll sell it back to you.
That's right. No, you're absolutely right. Solar panels actually, and they're not subsidised. And I'm actually looking at putting them on some of the industrial buildings that I've got, because actually, if you use the power that you generate, then you're saving a huge amount of money.
Yes, you are, but you've got to use it all yourself, which means also then investing in a £6,000 or £7,000 lithium-ion battery to store it, so you can use it. So.
Yeah, that's the difficult bit, isn't it? Is the cost of a battery if you want to store it. You don't have to store it though, Tony. I've got to go to the break, Tony, but I think actually solar panels are good as long as you use the energy yourself. Thank you very much. That's Tony from Hastings. Coming up after the top of the hour, we're going to be talking to the head of the RMT union, Mick Lynch, about P&O ferries. We'll be taking your calls and your tweets. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Sunday talk.
Good talk. News talk.
Talk radio.
The Tice Man cometh.
Stir up your Sundays with Richard Tice.
From global current affairs to the issues that hit closer to home.
Richard Tice.
On Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Mother's Day, and it's good afternoon. We've rocketed into the third hour. Time has flown by. There's been so much to discuss. Tweets and messages pouring in. I'll get to some of those later. Give us a call later in the hour, 0344 499 1000. But we need to talk about another big issue that would have permanently filled the front pages for at least a week if everything else wasn't going on at the same time. The extraordinary, outrageous decision of P&O Ferries to lay off 800 workers and replace them. They attempted to do instantaneously with people being paid a fraction of their wage. And I mean, I just find it utterly unbelievable, deeply damaging to trust in big businesses, trust in corporate behaviour and trust in capitalism itself. And I'm delighted to be joined now by Mick Lynch, the General Secretary of the RMT Union, who obviously been fighting for the workers at P&O. Mick, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I mean, what's the latest in obviously what's an ongoing saga, and what's the position that the union is able to adopt, and what you feel that the government is doing? Because it seems to me that they've gone they're not really stepping up to the plate at the moment.
Well, the latest is we're carrying on with our campaign, Richard. We had demos outside the dock gates yesterday at Dover, Liverpool and Hull. We had over in Northern Ireland on Friday, at Larne, and in Scotland on Friday as well. And we'll be keeping that up in the days to come because there's a deadline against our members to sign up to this package. Otherwise, they'll have their compensation cut by 2/3. And what they've got to do with those is exempt and indemnify a P&O against their illegal acts. That's part of the deal. So they give up their legal rights. So what we're calling on the government to do, and we understand the civil servants, the officials are working over the weekend to bring forward a package that will address some of these issues. But the crucial thing for us is not just the long term. We've got an immediate problem, about 800 members, and there's Nautilus, the officers' union, as well, the professional class, if you like, in seafaring. We've got to get our members back to work. They're all unemployed. They're not being paid anymore. And we've got to get that redressed. And we're hoping Chaps and the business team, Kwasi Kwarteng, can address this, because this is blatant piracy, if you like. It is piracy of the law.
But is the government accepting that there's nothing they can do with this? Or why are they not actually, or potentially perhaps they are, saying, well, actually, we're not going to grant new licences to these ships that are being staffed by people that are being paid below the minimum wage. They may not be safe, and just say to P&O, we're not going to give any licences. So essentially your business is worthless if you can't operate.
Well, the licences to operate are controlled by a body called the Marine Coast Guard Agency, authority rather, and they license all vessels in and out of UK ports. Now, they've impounded one in Antrim, in Larne, on Friday, because the replacement company called International Ferry Management, which was only formed 6 weeks ago, were filling out reams of competency certificates for people that had never seen these vessels before. And they've been caught out. They've been caught red-handed, filling out reams of paper. So there is some intervention by the safety authority, but they are purely a safety authority, not a regulator of business and ethics, if you want to put it that way. So the Tory chairman of the Transport Select Committee, Hugh Merriman, called on the two ministers in front of him, one from business and one from the shipping department, to bring an injunction, to go and see the Attorney General and get an injunction against this company to make them behave morally and lawfully. And it shouldn't be forgotten that this is a man who came on in front of a select committee in Parliament on a verbatim note and said, I have broken the law and I would do it again for the benefit of my business. And he's not showing any remorse for that.
It's remarkable. I tweeted out immediately that he should resign or be fired, and that he was damaging trust in businesses. I actually, people might say, my listeners might say I'm a bit sad. Perhaps I am. I actually read part of the National Minimum Wage Act 1998 last night, just to sort of get an understanding of this. I can't understand why P&O are able to use these workers, because in my reading of that act is quite clear that it's in breach of that legislation in terms of workers operating in territorial waters in the UK. And I think the Secretary of State actually, Mick, has the power to apply this act to individuals, even if they're not otherwise defined as workers. And so actually he or she could stop what's going on, but they seem not to have used this act.
Well, many of the Select Committee were of the same view, and we have pressed the government to take an injunction. Now, there is some murky areas about international waters and continental shelves and all sorts of stuff that people get mixed up in. So the route between Northern Ireland and Scotland definitely has to pay at least the minimum wage. But let's not forget, we don't earn the minimum wage, our members. We have negotiated union agreements in the traditional sense. They're not super wages. It's the normal package of sick pay, holiday pay, shift premiums and so forth. They're modest wages, they're okay. It's those that are being undermined, and just putting people on a UK minimum wage still doesn't go away from the fact that they've breached their contracts of employment. And what they hope to do in the long term is bring even cheaper workers in from as far away as possible, and they will negotiate local wages in the Far East and pay those people those wages over here. Now, this has got to be addressed. There's got to be clarity and an absolute direction of the companies. This is the least that you can pay, and this is the least set of conditions that you need to have in place. And that's what we're looking for this week. We understand that Grant Shapps is coming to the dispatch box this week with a message and some statutory instruments that may address some of the issues, but we do need to get our people back on those vessels.
I agree entirely, but what's the implications for some of the competing ferry operators, the likes of DFDS? What sort of contracts, Mick, are their workers employed under? Are they employed under these sort of Maltese offshore low-wage contracts, or have they got proper UK contracts?
Well, in the main, DFDS and Stena, the two other major ferry companies, are working under UK contracts and under union agreements, and the same with CalMac and Northlink up to the Shetland. So those are the big ferry operators, but they are undermined. So DFDS and Stena go to our European neighbours, and that is possible that they will say, I cannot compete. If you half your wage bill, it's more than half the wage bill probably, how can I run in the next berth to you on a wage model that is twice the price? It simply can't happen. And this is literally the race to the bottom happening in front of our eyes. And as bad as that, Richard, we're faced with the end of the British Merchant Marine. We used to have 100,000 sailors, Merchant Navy ratings, plus the officers, plying trade all over the globe. Now we're down to 9,000 ratings in Britain, and we're going to lose 10% of those virtually just in one fell swoop. And we'll end up subcontracting all of our trade and all of our maritime history and all of our maritime skills to other third parties, third and fourth and fifth parties. Outsourcing going. I mean, it cannot happen. We cannot allow that.
This is really important. The implications for the other ferry operators who might say
we're
that.
Meeting those on Monday, Richard.
Right.
As well,
so Grant Shapps, is it being made clear to him the risks of this sort of downward spiral, so that he can stop that as well?
Well, absolutely. I know that the companies are in touch with him, saying that they're outraged. Many of the companies who haven't always been our friends, Richard, you know what the RMT's like. We have a robust...
And I have my disputes with the RMT as well, sometimes.
Yeah, so we have a robust relationship, but with most companies, but we are as honest as we can be. But they are outraged as well, saying that, look, we're being cut off at the knees here by this outrage. So we're meeting them on Monday with DfT officials, and we're hoping to get some kind of consensus and agreement about how do we put a set of minimum standards and minimum laws that people can't breach, and everyone can know where they stand, because otherwise our port communities and our maritime communities will have no future. So if you're a young person leaving school, wanting a life as a skilled officer or rating in the British marine industry, you'd be thinking, I can go and work in Asda and get far more money than this, and I'll be in my bed every night, and I can meet my friends, I can have a life. Our people have to spend half their working time at least at sea, living in a cabin.
I get it. And if
nobody wanted to carry out that role, would they?
And so you get, as you say, a race to the bottom, and it's a sort of modern day slavery if you're going to be paying 3-4 quid an hour for those sort of working conditions.
Yeah, and we have no wish as trade unionists to attack people that want to earn their living. But if foreign workers have to come over, people from overseas, to work with our people, they should be paid the same wages. That's just a fundamental human right. And they should get the same terms and conditions. They shouldn't be segregated on the basis of their nationality, which the companies are allowed to do
Quite right.
in law at the moment.
We're just losing the connection a bit there, Mick, but I know you'll have a busy week. And on this, I hope and wish you every success in ensuring that the government changes this appalling course of action. That's Mick Lynch, the RMT General Secretary, regarding the P&O ferry crisis. I think it's appalling. I've got many issues with the RMT on other issues such as the London Underground, for example. But on this, they're right, and they've got to stand up for what should happen, what is proper and fair and reasonable treatment and working conditions for British workers. Give us your thoughts, your views by tweet, by text, or by phone 0344 499 1000. Coming up, we've got to also be talking about the energy crisis and the government's continued obsession with renewable wind. So we'll be talking to Lewis Perry, the director of Car 26, about that. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
Accept no substitutes.
Access all arguments.
The UK's official opinion exchange.
Free Speech Radio.
Shut up and listen.
We're on your side.
The home of common sense.
Talk Radio!
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We are well into the third hour. That was Mick Lynch, the RMT General Secretary, about P&O ferries. It's going to be a very important week for those 800 workers and what may or may not happen. But I'm convinced that the government actually does have the power to stop P&O doing what it's doing under the National Minimum Wage Act from the late 90s, and I think it should use it. I just hope the government lawyers, frankly, know what they're doing. Meanwhile, you can't please everybody. No, the underdog says, Richard, you think people listen to you? Poor, deluded fool. Well, there we are. Can't please everybody. Lyndon said, regarding the call from Dave earlier, the home of free speech, but you shut someone down when he talks about 9/11. Well, actually, Lyndon, the point was, I let Dave have his say, and that was a similar length call to the subsequent call from, I think it was Tony from Hastings. So actually, there's the point. People have their say and had a chat about it and then moved on to give someone else their say. I think that is fair and reasonable. Now, we need to talk about energy. We need to talk about renewables. And Pete tweeted in, my gas boiler is great, only a few years old, so I won't be getting a heat pump anytime soon, if ever. I was also very lucky to fix my fuel bill at the right time until August 23. Lucky for you, Pete. I feel so sad for many people. Well, that is absolutely right, because the cost of electricity, I've actually checked it back and looked at the government's what's called Duke's database. It's more than tripled in the 15 years from 2005 to the end of 2020. More than tripled. Whereas the gas price shifted by not much, by about the same rate as inflation. And there's a reason the electricity price went up, because the quantity of renewables went from about almost zero of our total energy supply in the same 15-year period. Renewable energy creating electricity went from 0 to almost 30%. And the renewable energy industry receives some £12 billion every single year in subsidies. And guess what, everybody? Yes, all of those contracts are inflation-linked to protect the rich, wealthy foreign investors. And what's happening to inflation? Well, it's going through the roof, so they're earning even more and more money. And yet this government wants to double down and have even more renewables. You couldn't make it up, how out of touch they are. I'm delighted to be joined by Lois Perry, who is the director of Car 26, who has a thing or two, I'm sure, to say about this. Lois, a very good afternoon. Thanks for joining us on Tice Talk.
You're very welcome.
So,
thank you for having me.
No, we've got in the Sunday Times on page 23 a lovely picture of a nice wind turbine on shore, and that sort of classic headline: "Spin for victory."
It's almost propaganda-like, isn't it?
Well, it is. How's it a victory to increase everybody's costs by increasing the subsidies to foreign investors to make fortunes? It's like the Sheriff of Nottingham taking money from the poor and giving it to the rich, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. It's pure Orwellian doublethink, that this is any kind of victory. As you say, you just said so succinctly before, the only thing this is a victory for are the people that are actually making huge amounts of money, the private companies, from the extraordinary subsidies that are required, for this to actually happen. I mean, I've been thinking the windmills produce half of the power and then last for half of the lifetime of a nuclear power station. They are completely and utterly unreliable, and they ruin, as a friend of mine, the Professor Brian Katz said, they actually ruin a perfectly good grid, because the electricity grid works fantastically on gas, no problems whatsoever. Yet though they're required by law to actually switch off the gas when the windmills are blowing, when they decide to work, and therefore then the costs go up 2, 3, 4, 5 times from wind energy. It's just ludicrous. And as you say, the more renewables we've had, the higher the price of energy. We need to be fracking. That's what we need to be doing now.
Talk to us about the answer. In other words, that it's not more renewables. Actually, we should be reducing our exposure to renewables. What's your view and the current sort of status of the shale gas debate?
Well, I mean, it's quite extraordinary, isn't it, Richard? Because we thought that, that Boris had seen sense and, the shale gas wells weren't going to be concreted in and they were going to have a year and then they were going to look at it and everything. And then there's a briefing going on yesterday saying, Boris is totally against fracking and he wants all these renewables. And it's almost like, Marie Antoinette or Carrie Antoinette's been whispering in his ear and said, right, no, Boris, that's not what's happening. We've agreed what's happening. Come on, stop being naughty. And then suddenly he's flip-flopped back over the other way and it's all this nonsense again. We need to be fracking.
It's very hard to understand because the headlines seem to sort of flip-flop all over the place to know really what is going on. I mean, the Prime Minister stood in the House of Commons and said that they needed to look again at shale gas extraction. But it seems, I'm not sure whether the block is the Prime Minister or is Kwasi Kwarteng. Have you got any intelligence on who is the greatest block?
I think that Kwasi Kwarteng just does as he's told, to be honest. It's probably the civil service. You've got massive vested interests in all of these renewable companies, and there's all this money's changed hands. And I mean, this really, really is Emperor's New Clothes territory. It's a bit of a scam, actually, and it probably come out at some point as a national scandal because, as you said, Robin Hood, stealing from the poor to give to the rich, the reverse Robin Hood. It's absolutely disgusting. And I urge everybody to sign the petition, the House of Commons petition, actually, which is to end the ban on fracking. And I really, really do. But I've got a message for Bojo for next week, right? FRACK. We need to frack, Boris, and we need to do it now. You need to stop listening to all this nonsense now.
But of course, fracking is just one method of extraction. There are other techniques. Yeah. And I would have thought the way out for Boris loves to, he's a great salesman. And we all love a salesman. And as you know, we've all heard Boris say that he wants to be a world leader in X, Y, and Z. So why isn't Boris wanting to be a world leader in some of the other extraction techniques, the latest technologies, other than fracking?
Yeah, no, he should be. He's got, there's something strange going on here. There's an absolute fixation on using renewables, which he knows and everyone knows don't work. They also require 100% gas backup. Where's that coming from to actually even work?
The renewables, they create electricity, but they require a big subsidy. We've actually got a graph for those watching on YouTube. There is a graph which comes from the government's database, and it shows the direct link between the blue line, which is the increase in the electricity price, and the green line, which is the increase in the percentage of renewables used. And it's just the vast subsidies that are made. Well, look, Lois, I know you're campaigning hard on it. There's lots of people. This tragically is not going away because the expression I use is we are at Everest base camp of the net zero cost mountain. They're going up and up and up. That's Lois Perry, Director of Car 26. Thanks very much.
Car 26. Yeah.
Thanks very much for your thoughts, Lois. And I think so many of you, messages coming in. We've got here, we've got one from Susan says, "Hi, Richard, the subject of renewable energy wind. Perhaps we could approach the PM and Rishi for some tips." Interesting. They seem to have an ample supply of it. Well, that's Susan with her clear views on it. I really do think that this is going to be, over the coming months, the big issue that is so important for so many people. Keep those calls coming in, 0344 499 1000. We've got a message in here from Brian about the cost of wheat, which was we could grow wheat to fill the Ukraine shortage, but we won't, typical of the government. I think the truth is, Brian, actually, that we couldn't grow anything like the quantity of the potential shortfall. The size of Ukraine as a geographical footprint is astonishing, and the quantity of wheat they grow. And it was interesting hearing from the UN earlier about just what may happen if there's a significant shortfall in the production of grain and the export of grain, because Zelensky has currently stopped exports of grains this year's for the moment. So we understand that. Another message in here from Evan, who says, from Somerset, who says, Richard, don't forget that all tax is paid by the consumer. Well, yes, I do understand that. It's the consumer that suffers. And frankly, that's why you've got to cut taxes, because with prices going up, consumers will work out how to spend. As long as taxes are cut, then people can work out the best way, how they spend their money to get the best value out of that. Coming up, we're going to be talking about the subject that has almost been forgotten, and that's the number of economic migrants that are coming across the channel whilst there is, of course, the crisis going on in Ukraine. Stay with us on Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Richard Tice on Talk Radio.
A first magnitude star of common sense.
The Tice Man.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
Richard Tice.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. I can't believe it. Where have 2.5 hours flown by? There's been so much to discuss this morning on Mother's Day. And we've got, keep those calls coming in, 0344 499 1000. Susan here tweets in, this waste of money, Richard, re the job advertised is typical of the way this government chucks money around for foolish projects. Look at the NHS for decades, money ploughed in the wrong ways, but not the areas that need it most. That's why we're in such a mess. And Susan should know because she used to work for it. There we go. And we've got another one here from Lady Anne who says, re-wages, this has been going on for years, Richard. Gangster firms recruiting from East European Employment Agency, bringing them into the UK to undercut British workers. Well, of course, in a sense, that was the whole freedom of movement issue. And that's one of the reasons, actually, that Brexit happened, because ordinary British people realised that something wasn't right. The wages, there was no wage growth because you had a permanent supply of people with lower wages. So there was no wage growth at the bottom end of the market the lower end of the pay scale, and that was simply not right. Anyway, we've got time now to go to a couple of calls. We've got Graham in Peterborough. Good afternoon, Graham.
Good afternoon. How can we rely on solar power and wind, as Mr. Boris wants us to? Because today in Peterborough, grey sky, no wind.
There we are. It's a great question. And a couple of weeks ago, I had an academic on who is very pro the renewable industry, and I asked him that. I said, "What happens when the wind doesn't blow? Do we light up the candles or what?"
Oh, candles? Oh, well, where do we get those from?
I mean, that's the point, though. When the wind doesn't blow, you ain't got any electricity, so you either need the gas-fired power stations to supplement it, or you haven't got any electricity. And, of course, the other question, Graham, is what actually fuels domestic gas boilers?
Well, gas.
There we are.
Underground.
It's
like
not
shale gas.
It's not electricity, is it?
Gas. Boris is just off his rocker.
Do you know how many gas boilers there are in the country, approximately?
I can't afford to change my boiler, convert it to a heat pump.
Nor can 25 million other people with perfectly decent domestic gas boilers.
Well, the only way to sort of make this country green and ecological is to wipe out 75% of the population.
Well, we're not going to do that. But actually, of course, it's much greener, Graham, to use our own shale gas, because you haven't got all of the huge cost in shipping. You don't burn up the shipping fuel. And also, the process of turning gas into liquid to put them in the ships and then to re-vaporize it, if you're bringing it from the Middle East or from America or wherever, that creates 4 times the CO2 levels than using our own shale gas.
Well, if somebody could explain that to Boris, like your good self, I would love it.
Well, Graham, we're trying, that is for sure. Thank you very much for listening, Graham, and your thoughts. We're going to head up from Peterborough to Derbyshire, where James is patiently waiting. Afternoon, James.
Afternoon, Richard. Last time I saw you were at a boxing gym in Bolsover, funnily enough. I had the cardboard cutout, if you remember.
Yeah, I do remember, yes. I had the gloves on and everything. Goodness me.
Right. A few things. With diesel prices, I've been a Yorkshireman living in Derbyshire. I'm one of the tightest men known to this earth. I've been using an old Citroen van with a mechanical diesel pump, and I've been using sunflower oil, and it runs fine.
Right.
It's £1.9 a litre. I'm saving 60 pence a litre, basically. Then another thing with renewable energy, I'm looking out of my window because I live at top of Bolsover, and there's a windmill. It's slowly turning. I don't think that's going to generate a lot of power. But what no one's really talking about is something that we are guaranteed. We're guaranteed 2 tides a day. Why
yes,
aren't
that's
we
right.
using tidal power?
Well,
it's a guarantee.
You're absolutely right, James. And there was a scheme, a tidal power scheme at Swansea Bay Lagoon, which was put forward, went all the way down the line, and then the government pulled the plug at the last minute, which is nuts. Absolutely nuts.
It is a guarantee. Every day you're going to get them 2 tides. That's going to generate electricity. Another thing, I've been going to Immingham quite a lot recently, and I don't know if you've ever driven down M180 and you look to your left-hand side. If you're going towards Cleethorpes, Grimsby area, you've got stacks burning excess gas from oil production. Why are we burning good gas what could be used?
Well, that's absolutely right. And indeed, actually, one of the ways that we can reduce emissions is by the carbon capture of gas from gas-fired power plants. One more point, James, before I let you go. Sunflower oil you're using, but here's a challenge. I learnt reading that Ukraine produces well over 80% of Europe's sunflower oil.
Yes, I've read that recently. Now, Tesco's, it was £1.9 a litre, and your price matched at Aldi. I went in yesterday, it was £1.20 a litre. Aldi is still at £1.9. There's other oils which I'm experimenting with over the next few weeks to potentially bring costs down. But I've not even knocked on chip shop stores yet, so I might even be able to get it for free. But I've put videos about it on YouTube showing honest It's an honest review of what I'm doing. So if my van blows up, then people know.
Well, that's interesting. James, thank you very much for your thoughts. That's James in Derbyshire, Yorkshireman, saving money, tips there. It's in the Yorkshire blood, isn't it? Wonderful. Absolutely marvellous. Bob here, he tweets in, Richard, the process of storing energy from days when it's windy by pushing up reservoir water levels needs to be funded by the ever-growing green levy. Well, the problem is, Bob, that it's incredibly expensive if you want to use battery storage to store electricity. Otherwise, when the wind doesn't blow, we've got a major problem. We've got to have the gas power plants on standby. And of course, that itself costs money. So that increases the unit cost of gas, and the whole thing just drives up electricity prices ever higher and drives up gas prices. It's completely unnecessary. Give us a call, 0344 499, with your thoughts, your views on this. Coming up in the last segment of the show, we're going to be talking to David Goodhart regarding immigration, economic migrants coming across the channel, the numbers and the implications. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Radio.
The home of common sense.
Permanent, persuasive, profound.
The machine code of modern thinking.
Now with 0% drift and dither.
Radio with an answer for everything.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We are into the final segment of the show. The 3 hours has flown by before Bob Mills at 1 o'clock to entertain us this afternoon. Now, we've all obviously been horrified by what's been going on in Ukraine, and we wanted to help with taking a decent share of war-torn refugees from Ukraine, women and children who've been coming into Poland and beyond. And there have been concerns about bureaucracy and hurdles put up. But we also mustn't forget what's going on the English Channel, where there's been a significant increase yet again of the numbers coming across the channel of primarily economic migrants from France. I'm delighted now to be joined by David Goodhart, the head of demography, head of demography, immigration and integration at Policy Exchange. David, a very good afternoon to you. So let's just have a look at what's happening to the numbers coming across the channel this year compared to last year. It's not that easy to really know because the government's not producing daily figures anymore. Is that right?
I think that's right. I mean, I think the current estimate is that about 4,000 people have come across on boats already this year, which is 2 or 3 times more than it was last year. And I think the Home Office's own estimate is that on current trends, about 60,000, 60 to 70,000 are going to come across the channel. And that's obviously kind of not viable. And I mean, one of the things that I'm interested in doing is, as it were, sort of capturing the spirit that we've seen in recent weeks towards Ukrainians, in kind of putting the whole asylum refugee debate on a different footing. I mean, what we need is a kind of big reboot. We need a kind of quid pro quo, because the refugee lobby will say quite rightly that there are not sufficient legal routes for people to be able to who are genuine refugees to be able to claim asylum in this country. And that is true. And the whole system is based on a kind of lie. I mean, we have this absolute commitment at the moment to the entitlement to claim asylum. It's an absolute entitlement regardless of the merit of your case, regardless of how you've come in, regardless of the numbers involved. And this is just not sustainable. So what we all do, all European countries are involved in this massive hypocrisy. So we make it as difficult as possible to get into our country.
And that's a commitment under the UN Convention from 1951, isn't it, on refugees?
It is, although, I mean, there are lots of arguments about what is required under that convention.
Yes.
And what is, I mean, the main thing you're not allowed to do is send people back, which is perfectly reasonable, to places where they're in danger. I mean, obviously, nobody in France or Belgium or Holland is in danger.
But in reality, David, of course, actually, we've now got programmes for people coming from Afghanistan, from Syria, now from, quite rightly, from Ukraine. Obviously, understandably, we've welcoming people from Hong Kong because of the imposition on what's going on there from the communists. So, there are a lot of different legal routes.
And we should open up more too. I mean, what we need to do is turbocharge, as you say. We actually do better than any other European country on resettlement. Legal, safe resettlement from camps. But it's quite a small number. It's a kind of few thousand a year from Afghans, Syrians, and so on. We need to absolutely turbocharge that. And the other thing you have to remember about that is we are able to choose the most vulnerable. Because at the moment, you have a Darwinian system, essentially. We make it as difficult as possible for people to get here to claim their right to claim asylum. So what happens is that, only the kind of fit young men get through. 90% of people on those boats
and I think, yes,
are young men.
And I think that is actually also what is upsetting millions of people in the UK, in that we see with the tragedy in Ukraine what genuine war refugees look like, the women and children, and yet it's young men coming across. And of course, there's a big difference, which is that the vast majority, for example, of the Ukrainian refugees will want to go back to Ukraine, whereas obviously the economic migrants will want to stay here. And you touched on the point about, give or take, the 60, 70,000 that may come this year, it could even be higher, is not sustainable. I mean, the cost of of essentially looking after and housing those people as they come over. I mean, it's in the billions and billions of pounds, and yet I don't think the Nationality and Borders Bill currently going through Parliament will make a blind bit of difference.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think we need a kind of a broad agreement amongst all countries, because lots of different countries have this same issue. Like you say, I mean, when Ukraine happens, we all want to open our doors. Most people don't want to stay for very long periods; they'll go back. But there is the other stream, as it were, of people who are taking advantage of little kind of cracks in the door, as it were, and pouring through it. And it's a Darwinian system, and we need a system of humane control, analogous to what's happened with legal migration. You see what happened with legal migration when we ended free movement. The anxiety about immigration has declined substantially. I think it was something like 65% of people back in 2015 wanted immigration to be reduced by a little or a lot. That's now down to 42%. And that's partly because for the last couple of years, very few people have come in because of COVID. But if you mentioned the Hong Kong situation, I mean, I think something like 2/3 of people have been welcoming of the government's commitment to potentially allow 3 million Hong Kongers to come here. So we need to do the same thing.
I think
we need to bring in control, and then people, we can have a target, 40,000, 50,000 refugees a year, something like that, from the camp. We control it. We choose the most vulnerable.
That's the point. It's control, and it's lawful. And there are, I think we've always been a very welcoming nation, but we want things to be done properly, fairly, and lawfully, that is right and just to do, that also actually works for our economy, as opposed to, what's going on across the channel. And I think people then become more concerned and then less welcoming of genuine refugees, and just whilst we've been talking, had a couple of tweets to that effect, if actually more people coming across the channel are going to essentially game and abuse the system.
Yeah, we need to delegitimise, both kind of politically and morally, irregular entry, and as I say, open up legal routes. We need to turbocharge resettlement schemes. We should have tens of thousands rather than the low thousands a year. We should sponsorship. We've seen through the Ukraine, how's the Ukrainian system, sponsorship and family connections. It also makes integration a great deal easier. If you're connecting somebody who's already integrated in British society, it reduces the cost. And as I say, it solves the integration problem to some extent. We can expand all of these things, and we have had a lot of people in the refugee world will say, but the people coming across the channel are not queue barging because there is no queue. Because that's not true. That we've had 180,000 over the last, I think, 15 years or so. About 180,000 refugees have come here through legal routes.
Yeah. You're quite right. It's about control and lawful and what's fair and what can be sensibly integrated and that works for our economy. David, thank you so much for joining me on Tice Talk with your views. That's David Goodhart, the Head of Demography, Immigration and Integration at the Policy Exchange. Well, keep those thoughts coming in, your views. It is a real concern. We want to be a welcoming nation. We want sensible levels of lawful immigration where we've got obligations, where there's a genuine crisis, such as Ukraine, such as what went on in Afghanistan, such as the pressures on Hong Kong. But I think quite rightly, we don't want economic migrants coming illegally and essentially costing huge amounts, billions and billions of pounds. And there's massive vested interests as well involved this side of the channel, making a lot of money out of that. Lots of tweets and messages coming in. Now, next week, actually, I am not going to be here. I'm taking a week off. So I won't be here next week, but I will be back in a fortnight's time. So if you don't see me next week, don't panic. I will be back. I've had a wonderful production team with me today and helping me, keeping me on the straight and narrow, adjusting people and putting people forward. Oh, we've had one here from... We've had a message here from Natty who says, Richard, why is the feed-in tariff from domestic solar panels not going up? Power companies getting free electric. Well, that's a very good point, actually. And I'm involved in solar panels. And it's absolutely right that, in a sense, the money that's paid by the power companies for the solar panel electricity is not enough. It needs to change. It needs to go up. Meanwhile, we've got Rick from Blackpool who says on energy prices, we've been encouraged to buy all these energy-saving devices over the last 15 to 20 years to save ourselves money on energy costs, and yet year on year, the price goes up and up and up. Well, it's not right. And I'll be talking about this until I'm blue in the face, probably. Now, we have to welcome, before the top of the hour, Bob Mills has just strolled gloriously into the studio, all prepared for your show. Bob, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Nice
Thank you
to
for
see
a
you.
lovely show. I drove in today.
How did that go?
Well, it was fine because I listened to your show because I've got DAB.
there we
I've
are.
got DAB on my thing. But what about this? I've got a nice car. It's quite a new car and it's got DAB. You can listen to DAB. You've got a sat-nav. And yet, the clocks didn't go forward on it.
Oh, so that was a bit of irritation.
I shall have the ladies and gentlemen from Peugeot in this studio next week to explain themselves fully.
To explain themselves fully. Well, luckily, I've got a smartphone and it worked automatically.
Well, they
Otherwise,
did, but my phone did, everything.
Everything else did.
My £9 alarm clock
There you are.
did.
Yeah, so what's coming up this afternoon?
I've got a nice show. I've got two authors in the beginning. Chelsea Clover, Clover Stroud is in, and Joe Swift coming to talk about gardening. And we've got the lovely Kelsey Connect who comes and talks about books. We have a literary section in the final hour. It's almost better than Radio 4.
It's,
really.
well, of course. I mean, honestly, what is that? Better than Radio 4. Of that, there is absolutely no doubt whatsoever. Thanks for listening. Thanks to my amazing production team for looking after me, looking after all of you. And thanks for listening and watching. Coming up after the break, it is, of course, the wonderful, the irrepressible Bob Mills. Stay with us. It's Talk.
Bold Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Defence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Sunday Talk. Talk Radio with Bob Mills.
Guests, interviews, reviews, news, and everything.
Powered by Debate.
Think big, think Bob Mills.
On Talk Radio.